good evening, everybody. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend and a wonderful week. And this week is going to be no different in that our goals here for the club is in two parts. One, we're here to educate and inform, but two, we're also here to create a collaborative community of individuals who would like to become financially free and financially stable. And if this is your first time viewing us or coming over us, please, by all means, hit the subscribe button to help us along our journey, because we are recording specifically for YouTube and everything else so that we could play in that space as well. This week, we were supposed to have a multifamily underwriter, Daryl Murphy, come on today. Unfortunately, he is not feeling too well. And I told him likewise, just get better as soon as you can. And we'll see about rescheduling him for next week. However, in light of Daryl not feeling well, I contacted a good friend of mine and a partner of mine, Warren Thomas, to come on. And Warren have a lot of extensive experience in the investing space, in the buying of business space, as well as he used to have a very robust portfolio in the single family residence. So I asked Warren, I said, Warren, why don't you come on the show tonight and talk about your single family experience and how you accumulated those single families, and see if we can at least get something from your experience. And Warren has decided to come on this evening and talk about that. Now, before I introduce Warren, there again, our idea for investing is that you have a portfolio unto yourself. And I'll explain my portfolio. My portfolio is 50% real estate, 30% other businesses. That means we buy other businesses, whether it's in a sector that we like. We decide on those sectors as we go about our journey. And then the other 20% of our portfolio is in the passive investment space, to include stocks, bonds, ETFs, dividend, drip reinvestments, Acorns.com, and a lot of the cryptos such as Cash FX, and a lot of platforms in the crypto space that simply trade on the tokens itself, versus me waiting on the price tag and the affiliation of the coins to either go up or go down. Now, I am also a Forex trader, and that's part of the fuel mechanism that makes sure that there's liquidity in the other two areas on occasions. But there again, I do a redistribution of the portfolio twice a year, once in June and once at the end of December. So if you're interested in growing your portfolio and everything else like that, this is how we create a diversified plan. That portfolio idea did not come from me. That came from Ray Dalio. I'm just a student of Ray Dalio, which is one of the largest hedge funds managers in the world, managing over 160 billion. So if they can manage in such a way that we gain a certain leverage on alpha, that's what we're here about. So whether it's commercial, whether it's single family, whether it's hotels, whether it's all of it is part of that real estate portfolio. And if you're interested, this particular platform is not just one particular area, it's all of it, right? And we all have to be aware of how it's all interconnected. Just to give you an FYI, as I bring on Warren Thomas, one of the most remarkable brothers that I have ever came across. Number one, nobody negotiates like Warren. Tonight, we're talking about single family residence, but Warren expertise is really in buying businesses all over the country. And I can say that I benefit from his tutelage, his mentorship, and just sitting at the feet and listening to his story and understanding the direction of where he wants to go. Because at the end of the day, as I shared with everybody on this platform before, you don't have to be an expert in all of your platform developments. Allow the experts to be the experts in that space. You just simply partner with them, and it makes the journey a lot easier. So Warren, without further ado, you are the man of the hour. And I'm going to just let Warren introduce himself, really, because it's going to be his story that we're listening to tonight. Warren, are you there?
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing this evening? And as Devaughn indicated, my name is Warren Thomas. I am an investor. Started off with real estate and now very active in acquiring businesses and so forth. And I look forward to sharing this information with the group this evening.
Well, Warren, I'm going to come right out of the gate and ask you, because most of us on this platform, with the exception to a handful, all have already started investing in single family, but they don't have a robust system just yet. How did you get started in single family investing?
Good question. Started many moons ago, and in actuality, it actually started when I was in college. The first house I purchased was a single family house in Houston, Texas. I lived in New York at the time and went to school at Bernard Baruch College in New York, and bought my first house out of town because I didn't know any better. And thank God I didn't know any better, because it probably would have scared me to buy something out of town. But sometimes when you don't know any better, you know, life gets a little interesting. But what had happened, one day, one of my aunts asked me to assist her with an issue she was having. Originally, my family is from Guyana, South America. And my aunt had, at the time, a very heavy Caribbean accent. And at this particular time, the oil market had crashed in Houston. So literally thousands of homes were in foreclosure due to the oil market collapsing. And if you know anything about Houston at that time, Houston was a city heavily dependent on oil. This is the mid 80s, but the crash happened a little earlier in the 80s and so forth. So she called me one day and said, "Hey, Warren, I'm having a problem with a guy. I'm interested in buying some houses." She worked for, I think it was Citibank at the time. And I basically had a kind of nondescript accent because I grew up in New York. And so I didn't have a heavily weighted Caribbean type accent and so forth. So she said, "Warren, can you call this guy for me? He lists all these properties that were for sale, but every time I call him, it seems that none of the properties are available. And I know they're available because he always advertises on a weekly basis." So I remember this guy's name. His name was Dalton. And I called Dalton and I, struck a conversation with him, and realized he liked college sports at the time. And I'm not particularly a sports fan, but for talking with people, I usually keep abreast of all the sports happenings, college, professional sports, get the highlights and so forth. So I can talk to someone who may be a sports fanatic, and we can have a reasonable conversation. And, so that kind of worked for me. So we started talking about football, Dallas, a lot of Texans are Dallas fans and so forth, and Dallas Cowboy fans. So we got into that discussion about football. And then I brought up the fact that, hey, Dalton, I saw that you have a list of properties for sale. Now, mind me, my aunt literally called him a couple of days before, and he indicated to her that he didn't have any properties available. But I called him. He said, "Hey, Warren, sure. I have about I think it was about 30 at the time. So I'm a college student. I didn't have um, an office or a fax machine or any of that stuff, but my aunt did. So I gave him her fax number into Citibank, and he sent about 30 properties for sale. And these were all primarily assumptions. Assumptions are basically properties that you can take over the mortgage. You don't necessarily have to qualify for the financing. You basically pay a down payment. And these were usually at the time VA type loans, Veteran Administration. And I think at the time they were doing like Fannie Mae loans that you could assume. So basically, he sent about 30. She identified maybe about 2 or 3 that she had an interest in. And I negotiated the deals on her behalf. She sent the money for the down payments. And lo and behold, she ended up owning 3 of the houses. Now, after a few of these interactions with Dalton, my aunt, I introduced her to him. At that time, he didn't remember who she was, and but he recognized her name as a buyer, and from that opened the door for her to talk to him directly, and I stepped back. Well, that was a situation for her, and one day she asked me if I had an interest in buying one of the houses. Well, I said, I didn't have any money for down payments or anything like that. So she said, well, come up with the money and I'll go in half with you. All right. So my real estate investing background comes from the standpoint of creative financing. And as I said, I was a college student. And usually at the time I was in college, about 86, 87 and so forth. You would qualify for financial aid in the form of Pell and TAP and student loans. Well, the thing about having financial aid is that for the most part, most of my aid covered my classes. So I always had excess funds from my financial aid. So long story short, I approached a couple of my friends one afternoon. I said, hey guys, I was helping my aunt do some deals in Texas for buying properties. I know several of you are in my position that, you guys have, extra money, because financial aid was a very big day for us in college at the time, because everyone would line up to the bursar's office and you were going to the bursar's office to collect a check for any overages or excesses at the time. So I had an idea who had money, who didn't. And several of my friends did. So it's about 5 of us. I said, hey guys, I'm putting up some money to buy some houses in Texas. Would you guys be interested in joining? And I explained the whole thing with them, the whole process, yada, yada. And a week later, I bought some pictures, showed the guys the pictures and so forth. And for the most part, I had all in. Yes, we're going to do it. This looks like fun, interesting, so on and so forth. Well, about a month later, we were all by the bursar's line, ready to collect our checks. And I said, hey, fellas, who's ready to come to the table to put some money down on the houses? Well, no one came up to the table. I was the only one that said, hey, I'm willing to do it and so forth.
Cricket.
Yeah, remember, these are all college students. So one guy, he put his money on buying a down payment for a car. And the other guys, they just splurge. They just, you get a check for $1,000, $2,000 as a college student. Those days, you were rich in some cases. So it wasn't shocking, but it was kind of surprising that no one came in with me. But needless to say, I took out my, I think I got about $3,000, and I went to my aunt and I told her, hey, let's find a house. I put the $3,000 down, which is my financial aid money, and I didn't need her help to finance it. I didn't even need to qualify credit-wise, and I assumed the mortgage, and that was my first house that I purchased, and held onto that house for many years. My aunt managed that house for us somewhat, because what she did at the same time also was introduce other family members to the same concept. And before we realized it, we probably had about 30 properties in and around Houston, Texas, in Harris County and so forth. And I think it probably at one point, it got to almost about 50 properties and so forth, because several family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, we all started buying. And my aunt, who got us on a journey, she was the one that managed the properties. At the same time, my parents also were interested in home ownership, and they had bought a 2-family house. So one of the second lessons I learned was that it's always better to buy a multifamily first if you're learning to invest in real estate. And a multifamily could be 2, 3, 4s, which are also quads, and up. And the reason why you would like to purchase a multifamily, very simply, nowadays they call it house hacking. Back in the days, we just called it getting the tenant to pay for your mortgage. So you get a 2-family, you rent out one of the units, and basically, if the tenant didn't cover the whole mortgage, they'll cover at least a portion of your mortgage. And I learned that from my parents. And so that was my introduction to real estate, through my aunt and my parents. And from there, just reading in general regarding real estate investors, different approaches to financing. And that started my journey. As relates to single family and multifamily homes and so forth.
Excellent, excellent. Now, when you started to get a little bit more serious about it, what were some of the banking relationships that you utilized in order to attract the opportunity to close the deal, whether it's banking or whether it's specialty financing? How did you manage the financing part when it was no longer your assisting on deal?
All right, a good question. Well, there was a gap between my college years and when I bought my second property. The second property came about around 1996. And between 1994 and 1996, I met a wonderful young lady who eventually became my wife. And but prior to meeting her, what I was doing, because I was a little creative, I started putting together meetings with people that I knew who had an interest in investing, but did not have the time or experience. In many cases, they may have good credit. Other cases, they have down payment. And since I had a little bit of both and experience, and I wanted to start growing a portfolio, I said, well, let me start, putting together some of these individuals, and we will start targeting specific opportunities. At the same time, I started reaching out because I was networking at the time through a couple of community organizations in New York. A lot of these organizations would have home buyer seminars and so forth. And I was a serial networker. So I was always meeting people. I knew a lot of lawyers. And through the lawyers, I also met bankers. And I developed a relationship with a group out of Long Island called First Investors. It's uh, uh, basically a mortgage bank. And the gentleman who I had met was a VP at that bank. We became good friends. And he told me one day, hey, if you have any deals on the table, we'd like to first crack at financing it. So at the time, I started advising people on buying houses, but at the same time, I said, you know what, let me organize my own group, because I wasn't satisfied with just doing one deal for myself. I wanted to do multiple deals. So in organizing the group, which included my wife at the time, I started doing a lot of the legwork, because most of my friends at the time, they're either working full-time schedules, and they didn't know how to look for real estate. But I've developed, level of due diligence that I know where to look. Every Sunday I was in the New York Times real estate section. I looked at a lot of the local newspapers in relationship to the classifieds as relates to opportunities for sale, distressed sellers, and so forth. That time you didn't really have a lot of websites that were dedicated like now towards real estate. So you had to be willing to go out there and kick tires and talk to people, find out opportunities. And I found one house through a community newspaper. The owner had passed away. It was her son and daughter who had the house. I called up a couple of my investors and I said, a couple of my friends who I wanted to be investors. And one young lady, jumped at the call and said, hey, I'm not only willing to put up the down payment, if you take over the management of the property, I'm willing to partner with you, because I explained to her what the process of partnership was, and she was available to that and so forth. And from there, I introduced her to First Investors. We got qualified for the financing. Since it was a four-family house, it was not just a single, it was actually a multifamily. Our down payment was a little higher than, let's say, if you bought a single family home at the time, because they were treating us as investors. I did subsequently find out that we could have probably gotten a lower down payment, but it was what it was. The bottom line was that I put the whole deal together. I negotiated with the seller, structured the financing with the mortgage company, the mortgage bank, and about 45, 60 days later, I closed, 45, 60 days later, I closed the transaction, and that was our second house that we picked up, which is a four-family. And about a month later, I married my wife, and she really did not want me investing with a group of other women, and at the time, so I was kind of restricted, and but she was my partner, and we started buying more houses as partners from there. Bought them in New York. 2003, moved down to Georgia, and I was looking at time to buy a business, but we were still actively involved in real estate. And when I moved to Georgia, when the family moved to Georgia, we started looking at buying additional single family homes, because some states are not, you don't have a lot of opportunities for multifamilies unless you're looking at very large multifamilies, 20, 50, 100 units and up. So we started focusing on buying a lot of single family homes. And again, use the same strategy. We went to hard money lenders. I had relationships with mortgage bankers, and I never really purchased a house through your standard commercial bank like a Chase or Citibank or any of those types. I found that mortgage bankers at the time were a little bit more creative, flexible, and would stretch an opportunity to get a deal done. And so that made it more opportune for us to work with financial companies like those.
Good, good, good. So what I'm hearing now, if I'm to break it down, I'm hearing you need to learn to have a good rapport with the seller, whether that's be through a sporting conversation or find some commonality in terms of topics that you can talk about, that you can relate to, because now that makes the negotiation of the deal goes really, really well.
Absolutely.
It's always good. I like what you also said earlier. Yeah, it sounded like a lot of Carlton Sheet. You listen to a lot of Carlton Sheet like me too.
Yes, I did.
Note down money transactions, finding out if the notes are assumable, that sort of thing. So I hear a lot of Carlton Sheet in your voice.
Listen,
For those of you who don't know, Carlton Sheet was one of the gurus in the mid 80s, all the way through to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually had a friend who had
Go ahead,
purchased the
Warren.
call. Can you hear me?
Did
Can
we
you hear
lose
me?
you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Good.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
with
I can
Carlton
hear you now.
Sheets. Okay. With Carlton Sheets.
I could hear you. Yeah, we
Okay.
could hear you.
Let me check out and then I'll jump back in again because there's some kind of feedback. Kafru?
Okay. All right. Yeah. So whilst we wait on Warren, I thought his story was a little bit interesting. And there again, once he comes back on, you guys can also start to ask him questions as well in that space. So I think he's rejoining now. Warren, are you with us? No, he got kicked out. Okay.
Hello?
We'll wait on him to come back. But
Can you hear
there
me?
again, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Sorry
I can
about
hear
that.
you
I
good.
know there's some kind of delay and I could hear you, but you're not hearing me clearly, but you can hear me better now.
Mhm. Yes, much better.
Okay. All right. Like you, I had a friend at the time who had purchased the Carlton Sheets program. And so I used to listen to a lot of his, at the time there were cassettes. And I also read the books in regards to no money down and creative financing.
Yeah, that was very important for the knowledge base of single family residence acquisition at the time. Warren, you're dipping in and out again.
Okay, let me try to see if I go to another location, if that will help. Give me another 30 seconds.
Yeah, I can hear you now briefly. Okay. All right. So if there are any questions for Warren, what would be better to do is cue him up whilst his sound is not as, and see how we could just rapid fire any questions that you guys may have that you want to address as it relates to Warren's experience in the single family space. So he was in here a minute ago. We'll see. Yeah, there he is. So Warren, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask them to ask you questions, and then we can see about you responding to some of those questions as we go along. If we continue to have sound problems, then what I'll just have them type in their questions, and then we can answer them after the session.
Okay.
Yeah. So if anybody have any questions, let's see if we can get them out to Warren at this time.
One second.
I've got about 100 questions if no one else does, Devaughn.
Oh, I know you do, John. Yeah. This is right in ace too, by the way.
Yeah, Creasy's got his hand up as well.
Thank you. If you don't mind, just a quick question for Mr. Thomas. I'm trying to find my first deal, and how would what's your routine like as it relates to finding deals? Is it Craigslist? Is it the courthouse? Can you give me some hints on getting started with trying to find my first creative financing deal?
Okay. Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, good. It really depends on the type of property that you're looking for. Okay, great. It really depends on the type of property that you're looking for. I use a variety of sources, including brokers. And I have specific criteria for the type of houses, and depending on the type of financing I'm looking at, that will determine which avenue I will take to identify a potential property. I've done everything from the courthouse steps. When we moved to Georgia, that was our primary way of accessing properties, was through the monthly auctions. We've also have relationships with brokers, wherein that I had brokers that specifically dedicated their time because we were volume buyers. So wherein that, somebody may have bought one house every few months, we were buying houses maybe at 2 or 3 per month. So depending on the opportunity, I was looking at a variety of sources in relationship to identifying property. I did not limit myself in that fashion. I never really utilized Craigslist, but I know for some people that was an option. But my primary sources were either through brokers and or going directly to the courthouse steps at the time. Currently, we're gearing up to buy multifamilies. And I think that's part of the reason Devaughn had me on the call tonight. Within the next few months, we're going to be looking at opportunities on the multi-level side, anywhere from 50 to 100 units plus. And basically, I receive reports for value add opportunities. Value add meaning that you can buy property, that you can do additional work on the property, upgrades to increase the value of the property, and then refinance the property at a higher valuation and pull the cash out. I get those kind of deals primarily through real estate brokers such as Cushman & Wakefield and some other entities that specialize in multifamily opportunities and so forth. So depending on what you're looking to accomplish, you may have several different sources that will feed opportunities to you. Lastly, for single family situations, there are lots of guys and gals who are what we call bird dogs. They're out there on the streets kicking tires. They're not necessarily looking to own a property. They're looking to identify for investors to come in and pick up a deal. They're not looking to hold on to a property, so they're most likely going to sell the property under a structure called subject to, and you take over the contract, close out the transaction, they make a fee, and they're out there looking for additional deals. So you don't necessarily have to go out there and look for deals. There are folks who are out there willing to do it for you.
By bird dogging, you're referring to like the wholesalers that go out there and find, but which do it for the small flippables, but are doing it for the multis, right?
Well, when I initially connected with a few bird dogs in Georgia, they were primarily single family. Once in a blue moon, they may have a multifamily opportunity, but for the most part, they were looking at single family. The multifamily opportunities that I've been subscribing to, let's say for like the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, they're primarily coming through brokers.
Okay, now I love this idea, by the way. I think assuming a mortgage is just an awesome way to pick up a multifamily. But I guess my question would, if you were in a smaller range, not necessarily the 150 units plus, but what we saw in 07 with the bust of the market was people were underwater. So short sales were the way to go, because assuming a mortgage would put you underwater walking into it, which was not a good option coming in that way. Now might not be a bad time if there's a minor correction or if people are over leveraged, especially on second homes. But I guess the biggest question I would ask is, how many mortgages are still written this way that they can be assumed, and are people willing to walk away and sign off possession of their home? Or is there an argument over minor parts of equity before they do it?
It's a good question. There are not that many that are assumable. I think it was after the 86 tax law changes that kind of changed the market as it relates to assumptions. But you may see an opportunity, let's say with VA mortgage. If someone has a VA mortgage that they haven't been able to pay off, which is kind of doubtable, there may be an opportunity to take over that VA mortgage. But there are other strategies that you can use in relationship to taking over, let's say, an existing property. For example, you can do what is called a wraparound mortgage. A wraparound, basically, if someone has an existing mortgage and they're having a difficulty in making payments, what you can do is structure a deal wherein that you create a mortgage around the existing mortgage, but the mortgage company should not, you may not want to inform the mortgage company because that may trigger the due on sale clause and so forth. So you can do a wraparound wherein that the person now is still making payments, and this requires having a relationship with the seller, but you're the one that's actually making the payments, and indirectly you're controlling the property. There are several strategies one can apply that are not necessarily assumptions, but they're creative ways of gaining control of a property and not having to come up necessarily with a large down payment and so forth.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with someone else in the area that does that, where he tries to rent and, wait time to flip the property and, basically buying usage of the house with a later closure date on the effectiveness when they sell it, which is, I think, something people with cars used to do an awful lot of. I love the idea. It's just finding a property seems the biggest challenge right now.
Absolutely. The thing about creative financing, you're going to have to put the time and energy into it. It's not an easy way to do funding for real estate, but it can be very interesting. And if you have the type of mindset wherein that you can look at creative ways to structuring a deal, there are deals out there that you can do, and there are always sellers that, for the most part, may be amenable to a structure, in particular, if they're having major pain points regarding the property. It's also depending on the type of seller you're looking for. As you may know, if you look for situations where a property may look abandoned, you can actually skip trace the seller to identify who the owner, not the seller, excuse me, a property looks abandoned, you can skip trace the owner to identify who the owner is, if they're in-state, out-state, if it's a estate property, if it's a divorce situation, if it's just straight up owner neglect. There's always an opportunity to go in and negotiate with that owner who may be neglecting that property and say, hey, I'm willing to take over this property and take this burden off of you. Can we work out a deal? But when you go to the table, have a potential structure in place. You don't want them to think about a structure. You're going to the table with a structure that will relieve that pain point for them, but also create an opportunity for you. But there's always, there are dozens of ways to do real estate deals, either on the creative side, or if it's just a straight purchase. For example, a lot of folks don't realize there are 100% down financing opportunities up to today, but you just got to know the type of mortgage. There are USDA mortgages that are available that you can qualify for with decent credit. I think it's at least a 680, might be a little lower than that, but the financing is 100%. So if you find a community that is somewhat rural, and rural does not mean fully cow pastures and horse barns. It can be a small town that has a population of less than 50,000. You can qualify for a USDA mortgage at 100%. And there are literally hundreds of towns like that across the country. You just may have to be willing to do a little traveling and kick a few tires, but there's the financing, that type of financing out there for you. If someone doesn't have the full amount of resources to do a large down payment as an investor, or even a smaller down payment. There's also the FHA programs that, it's 3.5%, 3% down. So you can pick up a property with a minimal down payment. See a property selling for $200,000 and you get an FHA mortgage or a Fannie mortgage at 3%, that's only $12,000 down. So, excuse me, $6,000 down. So if you can come up with $6,000, you have enough money for a down payment on a $200,000 property, and providing you can cover the mortgage, you have an opportunity there. So there are different ways, depending on what your needs are, how you're willing to approach a transaction that can get literally any motivated person who's interested into a property. There are also community-based organizations in several major cities that offer home buyers assistance. There are several banks that also offer, commercial banks that will offer down payment assistance and so forth. And there are also groups, they tend to be investors or developers that will create a structure wherein that they will assist with the down payment, you qualify for the mortgage, and at some point they'll just sell off the paper. You end up in a new house, and you didn't have to come up with a whole lot of money down. So it just requires some diligence on your side as either an investor or a first-time home buyer to look at what's out there, and most importantly, be willing to learn. I often tell people, if you're looking to buy a house, learn as much as you can as a first-time home buyer, or if you're an investor, again, learn as much as you can about investing.
All right, any more questions for Warren?
Mr. Thomas, you mentioned a broker, Crispin Wakefield. You threw a name out there. I was just,
No, it's CW. That's their initials, but it's Cushman and Wakefield. Cushman and Wakefield. They're one of the largest commercial brokers in the country, and it's one of the ones I utilize, and I use others and so forth, and but they're one of the ones that tend to send me a lot of deals. They know I'm an investor. I about 5 or 6 years ago, I did their buyer's profile. So I get usually an update in regards to their regional opportunities at least once or twice a day in regards to primarily multifamily. And for those of you who are familiar with Grant Cardone, if you listen to some of his broadcasts, one of the brokers that he utilizes is Cushman and Wakefield. He buys a lot of property retail, but he has a lot of resources in order to do so and so forth. But one of the things I also want to encourage, and this is something myself and Devaughn always talk about, is partnering with individuals, other individuals and so forth, pooling resources together in order to qualify for larger types of deals. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to pull down a deal, let's say 50 units selling at $100,000 a unit. That's a $5 million deal. If you have to come up with 20%, that's $1 million. If you have the resources, 401k, or other ways, equity in another house, yeah, you can probably do a 50 unit deal yourself. But if you don't have those kind of resources, then it's an approach you can use, which is, as I said, partnering with others. One of the things that myself and Devaughn is always kicking around are different ways of raising capital. And I give you guys a little bonus. If you have good credit, let's say 720 credit score, one of the things I'd encourage anyone to do is to open up a LLC and target lines of credit under your LLC as a business. Scale up your line of credit to maybe 100, 150,000, and that will give you the working capital in case you don't have the working capital yourself. And if you get 10 people like that who can scale up their entities from a situation where they're looking at 100 to 150,000, that's anywhere $1 million to $1.5 million that 10 people working together can put together the down payment to start buying multifamilies and so forth. So sometimes it may make sense to start off as a group, build some strength, create a foundation, and then as you grow your portfolio, eventually start doing things on your own if you don't have the resources. If you have the resources and you have the funds to do the down payments yourself, then absolutely go for it and take advantage of opportunities. Last thing I would like to mention, we're heading into a critical time in the real estate market. Rates are heading higher, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult for some people to refinance over the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years. So there may be a lot of product coming onto the market because of folks' inability to refinance. And that may cause a compression in relationship to prices. So there may be some decline in real estate prices over the next few years. How much, I really don't know. I'm just speculating, but there may be a time within the next 5 years that opportunities may be available to take advantage of situations that will yield you a good opportunity. property wise, but also a good ROI based on the discounts that the market may be able to give you going forward over the next few years.
All right, Warren, Thomas, thank you so much, man, for coming on. You drop a lot of nuggets, man.
Hey, anytime, Devaughn. You know I'm always here to help out and share the information and so forth.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Warren Thomas, and there again, he's not only for single family residents, he's actually one of the greatest negotiators for business acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions, the whole nine. So if that's also a part of your portfolio, that's obviously a discussion for another day, but we're right at top of the hour. So I'm going to end it here. Hopefully everybody got something out of the deal today. I'll hang around for a couple of minutes afterwards. But there again, if you have any additional questions, just email it on to me. My email is in the chat, and then I would forward it on to Warren. So thank you guys so much for coming out. Warren, it was a pleasure having you. And I look forward to more conversations just like this one.
Great. Good night, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, guys. That was
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you.